I hate this book because it makes me feel nothing but frustration. It makes me aware of how much of my life is ticking away. My blood is turning colder as I read this thing. My hair is greying. My skin is sagging, and I'm still stuck reading House of Leaves. No! No, 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 no. House of Leaves by Mark Z. Danielewski is the worst thing I've ever read in my life. This book has ruined me. I hate it so much. But because this thing is so clever, and because everyone who likes it is so much smarter than I am, I'm starting to wonder maybe that's the point. You know, I just didn't get it. So maybe it won, maybe it beat me, and that's exactly what it set out to do. Because this thing is so clever, and it's so perfect, and it's such a masterpiece, it can't be the worst thing I've ever read. It must be the best thing. And my destruction is exactly its purpose. This is what the author set out to do. Ruin people like me. People who like good literature. Destroy us with this thing. This god-awful thing. I don't know if I can express how much I hate House of Leaves, but it is my job to do exactly that. So, let's give it a go. Buckle up, strap in. Let's see what I have to say. Because I'm not even sure myself. I spent many years listening to men on the internet tell me how this book is an unqualifiable masterpiece, a perfect work of fiction, a book that is obsessed over, a book with an enormous cult following, a book that is so much more than literature, a book that transcends fiction, a book that is so many things at once. It is a horror story, a love story, a work of satire, a work of unhinged genius. And I see the argument for all of that. I already know what kind of comments this video is going to get. Every single statement I make from here until the end of the video, I can predict the response to it from certain kinds of people. The biggest comment of all will be, you just didn't get it. And I get it. I fully understand what this book is, and I hate it for that. So let's talk about what it is first. At this point, House of Leaves has an enormous legacy. It has been out in the world for over 20 years. And as you can see and hear, it is a pretty big, meaty thing. And maybe you've heard about it. I had heard that this is a story within a story, a kind of haunted house tale. But it's bigger than that. It's a book full of puzzles. It's a book that disguises itself as non-fiction, with an author inside of an author, full of footnotes and pages that you have to read upside down, etc., etc. And all of that is pretty much true. House of Leaves begins with an introduction from a man named Johnny Truant. He's a kind of washed-up loser who needs a place to live. He's based in Los Angeles, and a friend of his tells him about an old man who lives in an apartment building and has just died. And Johnny Truant goes into this old man's flat and rummages around. He learns certain things about this old man, and all of it is described just in the introduction. He learns that the old man was obsessive and quirky, and after rummaging around for a while, he finds a very weird text. That text is the story within this story. It is an academic work, an enormous essay, all about a film that doesn't exist. That old man was called Zampano, and the book that Zampano wrote was not The House of Leaves. It was something called The Navidson Record, which is about a film called The Navidson Record. That film is a kind of vlog / documentary / work of found footage horror. The Navidson Record was created by a prize-winning photojournalist about a family that move into a house in Virginia, and their house holds a strange secret, which is that its corridors shift and change and go nowhere. Doorways appear and disappear, and as the story goes on, they explore these strange nowhere corridors that eventually lead to a labyrinth. The Navidson family are having difficulties within this situation. The house is putting a strain on their relationship, as are many other things. They're worried about their children's safety, and their marriage is crumbling because of how stressful all of this is. The Navidson record is arguably a horror story, but as other people have pointed out, it's also kind of a love story, and I agree with all of that. As we go on reading House of Leaves, we learn about the Navidson family and this house, but the entire thing is presented to us as a critical essay analysing the film The Navidson Record. And Zampano was a crazy eccentric who didn't just analyse the film, but used his intention to write a critical essay to talk about all the other things in the world that interest him, from Greek mythology to architecture, and of course he kind of manages to loop it all back to the house, to the film, and to various other things. So we have a film, which is the core of all of this. Outside of that film, we have an essay. That's how it is all framed, and so we get to know about the author through how he writes about the film. And then of course we have all of the infinite footnotes, many of which are enormous tangents written by Johnny Truant, who found this and has chosen to annotate it, translate certain parts, make notes, make observations, and those parts are all terrible and awful, and you can tell it's kind of on purpose. Johnny Truant is a loser, and as he writes footnotes that we have to read, he goes on tangents about his own life, and so much of his life is disgusting and awful. He is a gross misogynist, a Murakami protagonist, and we have to read pretty often about his awful sexual conquests, or at least what he sees as conquests. We read about him going out to bars with his friend, getting drunk and going home with girls, etc, etc. His life is pathetic. He is pathetic, and he knows it. As one of my patrons pointed out while we were discussing this book, the difference between Truant and a Murakami protagonist is that Danielewski is not trying to paint Truant as a good guy, someone that everyone else admires, someone that all the women are attracted to. Danielewski knows that Truant is a washed-up loser. That is all part of the narrative, so you kind of forgive it for that. And I do, but I don't forgive the time that it wasted. So that's House of Leaves, a story within a story within a story. And it absolutely sucks. It sucks so bad, I will lose my shit more than once. So let's crack on. Now, as I've already said, the criticism that I am going to levy against this book will trigger a lot of anger from its fans. And the big problem that I can already see is how self-fulfilling all of it will be. Let me explain by talking about horoscopes. I don't like horoscopes. I never have. I don't understand them. I think they're an enormous waste of time. Astrology is silly and I see no appeal in it. However, I once told a friend a friend who likes astrology, and she said to me, "Well, what star sign are you?" I said, "I'm a Taurus." And she went, "Yeah, typical Taurus not to believe in astrology." So where do we land? How do I get out of this infinite loop where I say I don't like astrology and they use astrology to prove why I don't like astrology? How do I get out of that loop? The same thing is going to happen here with House of Leaves, and I'll prove it with my first point. House of Leaves does not have any respect for the reader. It is a book that purposefully and knowingly wastes our time. It confuses and enrages the reader, and it makes us think that the author is psychotic for doing everything he did with this book. It is intentionally convoluted. It is aggressively pretentious, and it shows an enormous amount of disrespect for anyone who might want to read it and enjoy it. Now, the argument against what I've just said is that art can do whatever art wants. An artist has a vision, they create their art, they own their art, it is their vision, it is their imagination that inspires and creates it. It is their skills, their talent, their time, their ingenuity. An artist has the freedom to express themselves, and Danielewski has expressed himself through this book. And how dare I say that it doesn't respect its audience, because art doesn't owe us respect. Art can be and do as it sees fit. And there is a lot of great art out there that feels like a waste of time. There is art that I enjoy that other people might consider boring or a waste of time. All of this is subjective, and to that I say, yes. House of Leaves is a vicious mockery. And the biggest thing that it is openly mocking is academia. As many critics have pointed out, House of Leaves is a satire of academic writing, of analysis and criticism, of source citing, etc. There's a moment early on in the book where the author cites so many sources. In the footnote, it describes photos taken by the following, and then about 3 full pages of names, hundreds upon hundreds of made-up names that the author wrote down one by one, inventing these names off the top of his head because none of these people exist, their photos don't exist, none of it is real, but he wrote them all down one by one by one by one by one, filling up 3 pages of this thing. It is obvious what he's doing, and I do judge him for using up so much of his own time doing that. But with regards to all the people who say that this is a work of satire, it's not good satire, is it? I love satire. I'm British. I live off satire. I live and breathe satire. But satire is often funny, and it often delivers a specific point. When you enjoy a work of satire, say Garth Marenghi's Dark Place, or the works of Douglas Adams or Terry Pratchett, you are being provided with at least one message, whether that message be social, political, or something else entirely. Usually it is one of those two things, and they do overlap. Satire does not exist without a purpose. Satire is created to highlight an issue within society. It pokes fun at it, and it makes us aware of it through humour, which is a much more digestible thing than just out and out complaining and getting very annoyed. There is no purpose to this book. If it is satirizing, the satire is lost within the self-seriousness of the book itself. Because the Navidson Record, the book within the book within the book, House of Leaves, does have a point. It does have messages that you can glean from it about domestic horror and about love. And so the argument that it is also a satire implies that you throw out the message at the very core of everything. And it really is a core, buried under layers upon layers upon layers of fluff, nonsense, and time-wasting bullshit. It can't be both. As a satire, it doesn't work because it doesn't have a point. It is not satirizing anything specifically. It is simply saying, look how wacky academia is. That's bollocks. House of Leaves is also written really badly. Now I have to say that I must give Danielewski a lot of props for this, as weird as that is to say, because he is juggling so many narrative types and narrators. Johnny Truant has a distinct and clear voice, as does Zampano, as does Will Navidson, as do the other characters that make up the story within the story within the story. They all have voices, but they are all laughably caricatured. And again, I'll probably get people saying, well, that was the point, you just didn't get it. No. I'm fully willing to accept the idea that if all of this is satire, then of course these people would be caricatured, like the characters in the Discworld, but it doesn't hold water. Johnny Truant's an awful guy, and I'm willing to read and enjoy an awful protagonist telling an awful story about his awful life. But he is written in such an awkwardly two-dimensional way that nothing compels me to enjoy the narrative. Nothing compels me to invest in him as a character. Another example of the book wasting my time. It's fun to hate a protagonist. There are many books that I enjoy where the protagonist is an awful person. Half the books I read are like this. The greatest example ever, Wuthering Heights. I've talked about that a lot. Johnny Truant is one of those terrible protagonists, and he's written very purposefully that way. But to what end? His story means nothing. If you go online and ask people, I'm struggling with this book, how do I get through it? A lot of people will say, ignore the Johnny Truant stuff, just read about the Navidson Record, skip the footnotes. And that's how it starts. You get to page 100, you start skipping the footnotes. You start skipping over Truant's stuff. And then you're getting through the book a lot quicker, and it's a lot more focused. Then why have it in there? Well, you have to read all of that, other people will say, otherwise you won't get it, because it's a work of genius. You won't get it if you don't read all the different layers, if you don't enjoy the footnotes, if you don't read 3 pages of names one by one by one. You won't get it. You won't appreciate the genius of this book if you don't waste your time on Johnny Truant and the footnotes. If you don't waste your time on the entire book. The saddest thing about this book is that inside of it is a really compelling story. The idea of the house with its impermanent hallways and doorways and darkness, it is so compelling as a story in and of itself. And I am not the first person to say this. So many people have said this if you go on Goodreads. There is a good story in here somewhere. And of course, Danielewski must know that he could have written a more traditional prose narrative about the Navidson Record. He could have written the Navidson Record as a novel, and it would have been great. Maybe not written very well, because he can't write very well. He can't write very well from the perspective of his characters or about his characters. Everyone is wooden, and it's all laughably stiff and dull. But it would have at least an interesting concept. And because that story is in here, there is that interesting concept. It's just buried under pointless nothing. The family and the house are great, but you're not really reading about them. Or at least when you are, you're reading about someone, reading about them, talking about them, criticizing them, etc., etc. So it all gets watered down and disappears. In that way, there is nothing artistic in here. Now, that might sound a little too harsh, and I am tempted to say, yeah, it is. Because this is a very admirable and impressive and maybe commendable, respectable work of art. But the thing about art, and I know that art doesn't serve just one function, it serves millions, but one of the big ones, one of the really important things about the existence of art, about the reason that art exists, is that it connects with us on a human and emotional level. I can't remember where I read this. I read this very, very recently. But it was a really lovely argument about art and its purpose and what it does for us. And it was someone saying that many people argue that art makes us feel things. But this person argued that art doesn't do that. Instead, art makes us aware of what we are already feeling. Seeing ourselves through works of art or connecting with the characters and stories in a work of art allows us to understand ourselves, get to know ourselves, bring our own emotions to the surface in a healthy and constructive way. So much art allows us to process ourselves and the world around us in a way that is beautiful, in a way that is calming or engaging and exciting. Art opens our eyes to ourselves. This thing doesn't do that. It can't, because it's too busy being stuck up its own arse. This thing is a purposeful waste of time. It is an author showing off how clever he is, how many layers he can add on to a book, and how many people will fall for it. I have spent enough time online lurking around in the places where this book is talked about to know that the majority of people online who talk about this book are the same people who think that Batman's Joker is cool. This book has an aura of incel bro lit around it. And it's the reason I didn't read it for the longest time. And after reading it, I totally get what's going on here. I cynically thought before reading this that House of Leaves was a book for lonely, sad men who wanted to feel clever. But that was so cynical of me. How could I think that? How can I judge the fans of one work of art in that way? Not everyone who enjoys House of Leaves is an incel who's only ever read this book and brings it up when he's on a date to show the woman he's sat across from just how clever he is. That can't be true. That's too cynical. And it is too cynical. But having read it, I completely understand how that is a thing. How this would be the favourite book of a certain type of creepy loser guy. Because it's exactly the kind of book that a guy would read and feel really clever about after he's read it. Wow, I'm so clever. You know, I read this whole thing and I got it too. I understood it in ways other people won't. And I'm going to tell them that. And when I hand this to a girl on a date and tell her, this is my favourite book, please read it. And she reads it and she doesn't get it, she doesn't finish it, she thinks it's a waste of time. I can tell her that she's stupid, that I'm smarter than her, that I got it, that I understood what the book was really about. I peeled back the layers, I saw the face of God. Because I finished House of Leaves and I understood it. F*** off. This is a waste of time. I hate this book because it makes me feel nothing but frustration. It makes me aware of how much of my life is ticking away. My blood is turning colder as I read this thing. My hair is greying. My skin is sagging, and I'm still stuck reading House of Leaves. There is no grand purpose here. Yes, the book is sometimes creepy, so people who say it's the greatest horror novel of all time can rest assured that sometimes it's a bit creepy. The people who point out that it's actually a love story are right. I get that, I see it, I'm grateful for that observation, thank you. And the sheer amount of time and planning that it took to create House of Leaves should be commended, maybe respected. Not by me, but other people. It is an impressive thing. I am impressed that it was created. But I am not grateful that it exists. I do not understand why it has to exist. I am not grateful for the time that I wasted reading it. It is painful. It is a headache. It is a waste of time. I don't know if it's possible for me to ever hate another book as much as I hated House of Leaves. I understand it. I am even arguably impressed by it. But I hate it. This thing is a curse that just reminds you of the fact that we're all dying. Subscribe for books.